Hey La, welcome to Coffee with Avila. I'm Aviana Lemaire, and here we discuss autism, ADHD, and just greater living. My hope is for greater living. And on that subject, I'm thinking about this concept of being busy. This term popped into my head while I was in the kitchen earlier and getting my coffee prepared. I just happened to want a coffee and not planning for the filming or anything. And I was thinking about this term. I'm not sure if this is exactly the term, but it's the gist of it, where people will see you busy doing something and they will pop their head in and say something like, are you actually busy working, or are you just pretending to be busy working? There's another one they had that's like, it's supposed to be humorous, working hard or hardly working. But there's this thing about, are you actually busy or just pretending to be busy? And I grew up with this term being said all the time, pretending to be busy. There's a difference in being busy and looking busy. Now that one has some wisdom in it, depending upon how you used it. I've heard it slung like an insult. Oh, well, you look like you're busy, but you're not actually busy, which is like a derisive remark. The way I've heard it, a derisive remark to say, yeah, you're not doing enough no matter what. But there can be some wisdom in it, because some people look at stuff. I noticed this all of my life, and I'm thinking about it, thinking about my reactions to things and my ADHD part of my brain, and how it's always going to be the ADHD and autistic part of my brain, because you can't really separate them. It's the whole thing. But I grew up with a lot of these concepts about whether or not I was busy, self-worth based on how busy you are, and people sort of validating themselves in that way. You still see it to this day. You might pop over and watch a reality show and someone will challenge somebody about why they did or didn't do something or say something, and the person's reaction will be, I'm busy, or I have a job, or whatever it is. It's all just kind of, it's sort of a synthetic self-worth flagging based on self-validating by believing that the busier you are, the better you are, the more worthwhile you are, the more valuable you are, the more valuable your time is, and the more valuable then anything you choose to do with that time is, because the time is inherently valuable. So wherever you spend it, right, that has to be on value. And then people will use the concept of their own time to insult somebody else. Oh, well, that wasn't worth my time. When in reality, it's not worth my time should not be an insult. It should just be an issue of what happens to mesh with your personal goals in your life in that moment, in that time. But all these things are used kind of as an insult. And I was really thinking about this concept of how I used to be constantly, quite legitimately, pretending that I was busy. And there is a reason for that. And it's not as convenient and cute as trying to self-validate, because that really wasn't how I worked. I never really could get a hold of this concept of a person being worth something for reasons that don't have to do with who that person is, but just have to do with some random glittering, sprittering fodder that someone threw in all random directions one day, like what you happen to do for a living, or how much you make doing it, or how much time you spend doing it. We're smack dab in the middle of a culture now where I have grown up seeing the flip sides of a lot of things. I was born in the 80s, and I spent my time growing up watching women changing sort of the definition of what they wanted to do. And it was a time of, I'm thinking about this girl, I'm trying not to, there's a movie called Working Girl, and that's not even really what I'm thinking about, but I think they showed it in that too. I'm thinking about a movie called Baby Boom with Diane Keaton. Used to love and watch this movie over and over and over again with somebody who was special to me, because they loved it, and I guess they kind of passed their love on to me. And I always remember as a child seeing this moment in the movie where there she was, and she's playing this powerful businesswoman, and the whole point at the beginning of the movie is she's living that life. She's made it work for her. And more interesting things end up happening, and it's delightful later on for anyone who hasn't seen it. If you enjoy a romp, I would recommend it. I I'm trying to sit and think from the perspective of 2025 if there's anything not to accept or tolerate in it. I don't remember anything right now, but I just remember it's the 80s. If I miss something, whatever. But nonetheless, I thought it was fun. I don't remember anything ridiculously horrifying, but it kind of spotlighted this woman who was living in this time frame, and the image that always pops into my head was her walking to work wearing these like crew socks and sneakers, because honestly, it's like the walk to work was a sport. You're power walking, you're getting there, you're in a hurry, but you can't really walk in those shoes, the business shoes with the pumps and everything. It was a time frame where a lot of definitions were changing for what was expected of me just as a human female. Not even specific people that I knew, but just in society in general. And these women were kind of changing what was possible. But it wasn't just about that time frame. It's about how much they got in it, and now they can do it, and they're fighting for their place, and the workplace is getting fuller in a way because there are so many more people now who would not have been allowed. And I went through this time frame in the 90s where it seemed like people were generally trying to take the approach of getting more business crazed, right? I'm choosing business because this is what it seems like most people focus with the income and work. It seems like where most people focus their concept of that sort of synthetically created self-worth that's more about the system you're inside of than your essence. And so the career thing seems like a really good point, but I'm having all these memories about it because it seems like in the 90s, and these are my viewpoints of what was happening, there was a big change when technology started to shift a little bit, and I remember something called a Palm Pilot, and I'm not sure if this was truly the 90s or if it was maybe the early 2000s, but I'm picturing it as being kind of this time frame where you had your flip phones and people were switching from whether or not they could be gotten at all times of the day by all of their business associates and do everything. Then that Palm Pilot came along, and you would see people walking around in the store and they'd have their headsets on. Sometimes it would be like somebody walking around that had a headset on that it shifted into their hair. It was attached over the top of their head, but it was on one side, like you used to see in some of the what I guess are now older movies, where someone would be working a phone line. It's attached on one side but doesn't have the ear on that side because it's made as a phone headpiece. So it comes over here, and then you have the earpiece over my ears there under the hair. Then you have the earpiece over the ear, and then you have a tiny little microphone. So that was kind of the advent of the time frame of walking around seeing somebody who for 1 second looked like they were really focused on their list and what they were doing. They were shopping, they were in the store, they were dressed for business, and they were just focused and not paying attention to anyone else. It wasn't rude, it's just that they weren't paying attention to you. And then all of a sudden you would hear them come out of that haze and be like, well, no, what I'm talking about is actually the one that we have to deliver by next Tuesday. That's not a Wednesday deadline. That's actually the end of Tuesday. They go into all of that stuff, or else sometimes they'd just be having fun chatting with somebody they knew. It used to freak me out. I ran into a lot of people who would give, specifically women, who would give stuff like their plans for the weekends and where they were going on vacation and all this stuff. And I just thought, please don't do that in front of me, because if I'm a random stranger who can hear you and be taken aback, the wrong random stranger can hear you and be taken aback. So small moment for warning, be careful about that stuff because you don't know who's going to hear it. I heard it and all I thought was, let me be safer about myself and what I'm talking about. You know what somebody else is thinking. Exercise caution. But nonetheless, they'd be saying whatever, and they had those phones, and it was all about the business, the planning. The Palm Pilot was always being talked about by people who were doing business and planning and upping their career and getting more and more ambitious, and they had all of these plans. It was really an interesting time. The housing market I was interested in at the time. It seemed like it was a time frame where, without getting into it financially, you could really grind. And if you had a bit of a leg up or a foothold inside of that whole machine and that whole industry, you could really achieve what looked to be a lot in material gains and that concept of power that's really just, what you do and how much you make and how long you've been doing it and how many hours you work. So it's like people were gaining some kind of apex of power. Then in the 2000s, it's like the tech started to get really sleek. Even the flip phones were getting a little bit more obnoxious. Some of them had QWERTY typewriters, and people were using them again to get busier and busier and busier. It was work. And it was dealing with the kids and contacting the spouse and keeping everything in order. And then all of a sudden, did I say order or or-er? I feel like I skipped my D there for some reason. We don't want to do that. Nonetheless, it seems to me that what ended up happening around the iPhone, the advent of the iPad and the iPhone, and it's not really that I'm talking about tech, but tech seems to be really coming in here because it's how you keep connected and you get connected, you connect with everybody. It's like when that iPhone happened, it didn't take very long for people to stop constantly talking about their tech because of business and gains. And they were suddenly talking about it because of interesting information, minutia. It turned into entertainment. They can listen to their music all the time. The earbuds came in. Now you could have somebody walking around with earbuds and you could see both of the earbuds, but sometimes they'd only have one in. That was even less perceptible than the headset that you could sometimes see from the other side. And now people were out there kind of experiencing this new thing, this new type of social media. They were doing Facebook stuff on their phone. They're photographing and uploading immediately. I swear there was a time frame when Instagram had another name and a slightly different emblem, and I don't remember what it was because I wasn't into that. Twitter was new. And it kind of shifted to where now, not only did it not have to be that you were busy with business as usual, it could be that you were busy with business as unusual. You could now be doing a business that's like what they now call it, I guess that's a fairly new term, a digital nomad, where I'm not sure that it's 100% always the name of a profession, but every time I hear it used, it's somebody who's saying, yeah, I can do what I do wherever I can do it in the world. If I have a Wi-Fi connection, I can do my business because my business is online, it's digital, I record, I have a blog, I do all this stuff, you know, it's kind of in the tech. Changed the landscape of what you could do. Now there are things where you can have a business, a lot of people, where it's accessible. This is what happened. It became so accessible, and a lot of people have businesses where they can be spending all of their time occupied digitally, creating digital products. You could have a whole business for a whole, theoretically, you could probably do it for your whole lifetime if it's successful enough, and never produce a physical object, but you've been producing things that are affecting people's lives and your income and your well-being for this whole time. That could be your whole career, and you could be doing it from anywhere. And I noticed that when that happened, these devices also offered people another way to tell the entire world how busy they were all the time, and now they could prove it. Because if they had the Palm Pilot, if they had, you know, the flip phone, and the earbud or the headset and the Palm Pilot and the iPhone and the tablet, the laptop, whatever it was, they were carrying their tech, and having their tech out was proof that they were super busy at all times, right? And at that point, people were really making a point of making sure, you don't know if I'm on social media or not, I might be working. And also, even if you see me on social media, that might also be my work, because I might be making money. I could have contracts, blah, blah, blah. And so it seems like we've reached a hilt now where if you're not busy, you're not worth anything. And if you're worth anything, you're busy. And it reminds me again of being an adolescent and watching TV programs where there would be a high school vibe, generally, literally a high school, but high school vibe, maybe around college age. And people would be like, oh, there's a party. And the party is the only important party because of the people who are having it and where it's taking place. It's so cool. And they would say something like, anyone who's anyone will be there. And now it seems like we're kind of in a place where it's gotten to the point of being busy being that party. Being busy and the business of being busy has become the party that is the coolest thing because of who started it, where it came from, how it blew up. You know, the YouTubers with who had multiple millions of viewers before anyone even really knew that was possible. It's all been started. It's amazing. And it is amazing. But it's like the business of being busy is now that party everybody wants to be at. And everybody is walking around talking about how busy they are and how busy you need to be because this is the cool kids party Being busy is the cool kids party, and anyone who's anyone who will be there will be there. And so then we hit an interesting thing that I'm thinking about with trends about slow living. And I mean, I guess that's some kind of branded term. I looked this up, and apparently SLOW does stand for something, and it's different words like sustainable, blah, blah, blah. And that's interesting. It's a newer term, but it's a term. I'm fine with the term. It's just that I'm saying I'm referencing the lifestyle that came long before, excuse me, hiccup vibes. I'm referencing the lifestyle that came long before that term happened. And it seems kind of interesting that it's a full circle kind of event. The busier you get and the more you have to be busy, the busier you have to be, the more some people are going to just eventually get on this sort of whirligig, whirl around. What's the name of that thing? It's like a Ferris wheel. They're on this thing. It's a carnival ride. It keeps spinning. It keeps going. All the cool kids are on it because it's the only cool ride. And now we've reached a point where so many people are talking about trying to slow down. And they're not always trying to slow down just because they're mentally fritzed by it, because sometimes people just can't physiologically deal with all of this. It's a lot of stress, and not everyone's built for that. But there are so many reasons. The spirit, the body, both could be screaming for you to stop. And so now we've reached a place where people are talking about slow living, and it moved on from that to moving into smaller houses. And my entire point here is there's some kind of currency that is looking like you're busy, whether you are or not. And I grew up with that. Even before I saw all these things happening, 90s, 2000s, and all that stuff, I grew up with that because my ADHD brain made me look like I wasn't busy. And when I was busy, for some reason, what I was doing, sometimes it varied, it depended. I had a very disjointed series of experiences in life. Sometimes it was all good and I was being encouraged. And sometimes it was not all good and I was very much being discouraged because I didn't look like I was busy. I wasn't busy enough. It's very much, what are you doing? And I'd be like, I'm doing this. And then you get something in return like, well, you look like you're just sitting there. And if you can just sit there, then you could be doing this. It's that kind of culture. Some of those words would be said to me. Some of them I'm using as an explanatory thing. It's like, you don't look like you're busy. You need to be busier. And I had that going on. I think a lot of us who are experiencing the autistic and ADHD brain are having the experience that everybody else is going through over the course of these decades before we exit our childhood, because people have in mind what they think is busy and what they think is value and what they think you should be doing. And if you don't look like you're doing it, to them, to their perception, and they don't get what you're doing, sometimes it's like, okay, well, you're not doing anything. You're not using your time properly. And I ran into this with a lot of things. I don't want to hit 50 million subjects, but I also think about the concept of that term where people would say, oh, you start a million projects, but you never finish anything. That's it. It's like you never finish anything. You absolutely never finish anything. And I've heard a lot of people who are us, and we've done that, especially the ADHD thing, ADHDers and autistic and ADHDers. People have said, we started this, but you didn't continue it. And they're talking about that in their life story, and they're often delineating their own experience as being of their own experience of themselves completing things as being about whether or not they can complete them, whether or not they can complete a notebook that they've started. And all of these things are valid desires if that's what you want to get done or what you need to get done. But I'm thinking about how in my personal life, man, I go through a lot of that stuff. I run the gamut. Some of it means something to me, some of it doesn't. I've had a million notebooks that I've started and never finished for various reasons. And if I get into those, it's going to be a much longer video and I'll get off the rails. Because, you know, I also had a lot of I grew up with financial abuse, and there was a lot of financial trauma. So when I would get something that was nice, like a notebook that was fun to write in, that had good paper, something of value, I would often begin it with great gusto and then stop using it because of the specific trauma of thinking, okay, I have something nice and I'm going to run out of pages. I'm going to run out of paper. What happens when I run out? And then I go down the spiral of thinking, I'm going to use it very judiciously. I'll write random notes in the bad notebook that kind of feels like a misery to write in, and the good notebook that I'm afraid I'll never be able to have again, I will only write the special notes that look really nice. So it wasn't because I wanted to look perfect or Instagram worthy, especially long before Instagram was a thing. It was just that I was afraid to run out. And I went through a lot of trauma about that, and I don't want to get into it, but there are other edges, and I do want to share them because they impacted me and my experience. And so my reaction to things is not 100% ADHD or autistic and ADHD. It's also experiential from the other stuff I went through. But I sometimes would just not finish a notebook because I quite frankly would start it and then just be bored of it. In fact, those college ruled notebooks that they used to mark down like crazy so you could get them for about a dime a piece around back to school season, I used to love those because that was a time frame when I could really, it was a moment where if everything was set up properly, I could really stock up on stuff. And so I'd end up having a fat stack of these 10-cent notebooks, whole lot of paper I could write on, song ideas, notes from life, random thoughts, whatever I wanted. And I loved having that sensation of freedom. But then my brain just needed a different kind of stimulation. I would sometimes be using a notebook and never finish it because the packs would come with, I don't know, red, yellow, blue, green, purple, let's say. And so I would pick up that purple notebook, with purple being my favorite color, and feel so inspired and want to write all these notes. And then all of a sudden one day I'd look at it and it had worn or changed, and I was just tired of the particular shade of purple, and I just felt like I couldn't write in the notebook anymore. I always chalked that up to being an artist, because I was also living in a culture that was like, oh, artists, they're just so weird. Sometimes they do this odd stuff. And I am an artist. I am an autistic artist. It's both of those things play in. But sometimes I would change because I couldn't deal with the purple notebook anymore. So then I just wanted the opposite. I might go grab the green notebook. I wasn't going to finish the purple notebook, but I had a legitimate reason for not finishing it, because the way my brain worked, this might not sound legitimate, but I'm saying it's a lot about your perspective and where you place your value and your value in yourself. I was fine because I knew I wasn't going to use that purple notebook anymore, but I knew that I had a green one that looked really interesting. And when I looked at it, my mind wanted to write new things and think new things, and it inspired me. So even to this day, when I'm thinking about how I'm using something like that, it kind of went off on that. But I think in my mind, these points are related, because it's so much about what you're doing, your completion, whether you're busy with something and whether or not you're completing constant tasks, to me are really related. So I would not feel upset that I wasn't going to complete the notebook, because I just knew my mind just feels stimulated by the green notebook right now. And sometimes I'd work my way around and come back to that color. But then sometimes I wouldn't. And because they were so inexpensive and I was able to stock up at some point, sometimes I had enough notebooks to keep going around through. And I never completed a lot of them. Time would go by, years would go by. I'd have another need. I'd use a different kind of notebook or something else, and I didn't finish them. And I don't feel bad about that, and I don't look down on it, because I know what was happening and it felt good and stimulating to me. And possibly because I never had access to the concept of diagnosis or anything, nobody looked at it and told me that it was an ADHD symptom and that it was a sign that I needed to tweak something and do it better. And I want to specify, it wasn't ruining my life. I wasn't feeling bad about it. I wasn't spending, it wasn't an option, but I wasn't spending to the point where it was harming anything. That's something you learn when it's not just a financial issue, but it's specifically financial abuse. So I didn't know how to make decisions. I wasn't having a bad experience because I wasn't finishing the notebook, and no one told me that it was a failure, so I didn't feel bad about it. And that same thing applies to this concept. I'm gonna have to take a break in a second. That same thing applies to this concept of being busy all of the time. While there's a lot of traffic and I can hardly get my mind together, let me take a sip and restart that sentence. That was some extremely, extremely loud traffic right there. That really threw me. Okay, So what I'm saying is that being busy and looking like I was busy or not looking like I was busy, to me, the term they use nowadays is that's a you problem and not a me problem, because how you're perceiving what I'm doing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the truth. And going back to being that artistic mindset and having a brain that just worked differently than a lot of the people I was around, I would often be extremely busy because a lot of my talents are ruminative. Is that a word? They're about ruminating. They're about thinking. They're about processing. They're about being introspective. It's about the psychology of a thing. It's about how the spirit works versus how they're telling you your body needs to function. You know, that robotic body must function in the exact same way. You must look busy in exactly this way. You should have that expression on when you're studying or you're not really serious. If I'm talking to you, you need to be drilling me with eye contact or I know you don't care. You know, I wasn't concerned with what the flesh was doing and the meatballs and everything. I didn't care about that. I was interested in what's going on inside. I can listen to you with my eyes closed and you don't get to perceive the eye contact that your neuroculture has been accustomed to. But I am listening to you and I'm hearing you better with my eyes closed if I have the chance, or looking off at something, because then it's like a meditative thing. You're just doing something, a soft gaze, like walking a labyrinth while you're having a prayer or you're ruminating. It's something to occupy those small motor skills or whatever it is that you're doing when you're doing, like sometimes people like to sew or knit and that's when they think. You're occupying your hands or your feet or whatever it is, and it's allowing you to kind of occupy your physical body just enough that in some way it connects with that mental part of you that can kind of unleash itself and enchain itself, right? If I'm not looking at somebody, that's what could be happening. So if I didn't look like I was looking at a screen or a book and I was studying hard enough, or I was really lost in what was being said, it literally didn't matter at all. It's completely inconsequential. Once again, the new term is, or the newer term is, that's a you problem, not a me problem, because it's about your perspective of what's happening. But your perspective of what's happening is based on your capacity to process your own perspective. It has nothing to do with how busy I am or what I'm actually doing. And as an artist, I would sometimes be visualizing a drawing I was going to do, or a painting I wanted to do, or thinking about all the amazing art that I had seen. The other day, I saw a butterfly out the window. I heard myself say butterfly in the sky. I was singing butterfly in the sky, and I went through the whole thing, and I was standing there at the window looking at the butterfly and where it was in some greenery in the area. And I sang that whole song, and I thought about how I loved watching that show. Did I say, anybody who doesn't know, watching Reading Rainbow growing up? Because I used to be able to see and think all of these things. I couldn't see and think in any other capacity, and so all that stuff would be going into me. I like that. And there was a program too, while I'm on the subject, Linda Ellerby had a program that was news for children, and Reading Rainbow and that news program, both, I had an experience I wasn't accustomed to. Nostalgia for the time frame. This might be a long one. I wasn't accustomed to people talking to children like we actually exist. Like we have spirits and minds and we can process information. Like we care about what somebody's going through. Let's say on that news program, I remember them talking about a child who had a culture that involved having their hair long and braided. The school had an issue with that, and I don't want to bring up tense subject matter, but the school had an issue and she went into it. She talked to the child, she talked to the parents. They went over the whole subject matter. And before it was over, I had this new understanding of this point of a culture where I had seen that this was a thing, the braid and everything, but I didn't understand the heart and the spirit behind it until that moment. I really had this amazing experience with that because I wanted to learn, and that's what I did. And in that moment, that's another thing. People would just be like, oh, you're watching TV. Oh, you spent all your time watching TV. Oh, what were you just doing? Oh, I'm watching this show. Oh, you were just watching TV. I was expanding my consciousness, baby. I was understanding someone I could never have known to understand until that moment when it was presented to me. It's not about whether you're watching TV. It's about how you're watching TV. It's always about your intention, and what's the intent, and what's the capacity of the person with the intent, and what's going in, what can you learn from it. You can learn something from anything potentially, but in that moment it was built for me to learn. And then I think about reading Rainbow, because I saw so many amazing arts I'd never seen before. I saw somebody making shadow boxes where they put all these figures on the wall, and it was just magical to me. On the wall, so the shadow box was there, right? So you're facing the shadow box, it's coming at you, it's got that depth, and instead of putting in cute things like, I don't know, a bunch of dried roses, they were building a whole, what would they call it? I don't even know what to call it. They were making something like a little microcosm of life. One of them was circus themed, and they had little working things inside with little working strong men and stuff that you would see in the traditional iteration of a circus. And there were little strings and things you could pull, so that once the box was set up on the inside and it was closed, you could interact with all the stuff on the inside and make them move. It was amazing. It was like what they used to, okay, I know in these days it has a different term, but like at the beginning of the movies where they would have a box with a moving picture inside and they called it a peep show. You know, you peep in there. It was like that, except with a grander window so a whole bunch of other people could look. I was absorbing this stuff and it stimulated my mind. I saw instruments I'd never seen before. I saw stringed instruments from Japan, and I heard people talking about how they would, it was just some of the most incredible stuff. I saw people doing forms of, and I can't remember what it is right now, but it might have been a Brazilian, I don't know. I'm saying there was something that I remember from elsewhere in the world, and I don't remember what it was now anymore, but maybe I'll go look it up. And it was a form of dance with this long tribal history. And the dance was like it was like a choreographed war movement. It was people who were learning at different ages to perform this dance that was also learning to fight. It was teaching them self-defense. It was so fascinating. And the whole time, it would be one of those situations where it'd be like, oh, what are you doing? Watching TV again? You need to get up and do something. I'm doing something. I'm becoming what I want to be in the world. I'm embodying the knowledge I want everyone to have access to. I'm caring about something outside of myself. I'm seeing it without having to go there. I'm experiencing as an autist who excelled at effective empathy, or what they just used to call, what I was taught and what I always looked up and saw the definitions of as just being empathy back in the day. And that, what they call cognitive empathy now, I was always just thought that was sympathy, and when you would look it up, that's how it would be described. And it was basically the difference between being able to reason out that someone else had a reason for doing something or feeling something, and actually being able to have that experience and open up. It's a spiritual connection where you can sense something in a way that's not just about having your meat brain be able to pick up on something on paper. And that is, of course, a valuable aspect of it, but it's very weird for me to have the terms now turned into, like, they're both now empathy. I don't know when that happened. All I know is it's a newer discovery to me. And it's odd because it's something I discovered around the time frame that I learned that instead of believing autists can't have empathy, now science has discovered that we actually excel at it. And now they call it affective empathy, and this other thing that was just sympathy is so well known as cognitive empathy. I don't know, I'm saying, right, because this is what I do. I don't know when all of that happened. I just know I started hearing it circulating and people using the terminology and referring to it that way around that time frame where it was kind of, where it was found out that this isn't something where we all have a deficit. Some of us have an extreme strength. And that's what I was doing. I was exercising those strengths. But I just remember how different people would be like, oh, you're just watching television, huh? Because in their mind, from their capacity and perspective, watching television meant wasting away. And it was me enlivening myself in a way that was unique and rare and that I couldn't do where I was. It'd be like, get up, go out, do something, meet people, play. I was a child. I was a child growing up in a Mayberry situation. I wasn't allowed to roam everywhere and go everywhere. I was protected to a certain degree that made sense for what was going on. I couldn't go to so many places and meet so many people that I could learn in the area where I was allowed to go, the things that I was learning from watching Reading Rainbow and all this different stuff. I got to see things from all the way across the world. I got to see images of things blooming and blossoms falling, like the cherry blossoms, sakura. And I would never have been able to see that where I was, because they didn't grow and bloom in that way. It just piqued me and awoke something in me, and I was just living my life. I used to know how to rest and take a moment to indulge in what they call a special interest, a tip-top interest, something that I loved that really made me feel alive. And then I ended up going through so much of people telling me I wasn't busy, I'm not busy enough, I'm not doing the right things. It traumatized me. And long story short, I really thought I was going to talk more about this, but I'm having more fun talking about the beautiful things, and I want to highlight that right now, because that is so much better and I feel so much more alive. I went through, I'm just going to mention for a while, so much trauma about being judged, and it wasn't good enough, and I wasn't studying hard enough, and I wasn't studying long enough, and all these different things. And I was one of those people where my life was study. I didn't have to sit down with a book, because until the abuse and the physical ailments that had me incapacitated came together to the point where I couldn't deal with stuff anymore, I was that person you hear about sometimes who aced all the tests without having to crack the book, because I already knew. It wasn't like the knowledge just magically downloaded into my mind, although that is a thing. It actually is a thing. What was happening was that by the time I reached the high school class that was asking me all these psychological questions, I already knew all the answers. Because when I was about 9 years old and confused by all these people who I now know were not neurodivergent, the same way they were confused by me, I was confused by them, except I was surrounded by them. I couldn't understand how all of them worked. I discovered my first comprehensive psychology book. I picked that thick sucker up and I started reading that, and I learned things that helped me to handle everybody from that point to this point, and will continue to do so. I was expanding myself in that way at 9 years old. I didn't have to study in high school. Well, I'm saying 9. I don't remember when the actual age was, but for some reason right now, all I can think of is 9. And it seems about right. Because at that point I was really into that I started to just pour over specials and documentaries, whatever books I could get my hand on any kind of psychology, abnormal psychology, anything. I was just into it like that. And the reason why I didn't have to study was because I already knew it. I wasn't making lucky guesses. I just already knew all of this stuff. So I was not looking like I was studying all the time, but for a certain amount of time I wasn't complained at very much because I was getting 100s. Why? Because psychology was my thing. It was easy for me. It's one of the places where I personally really excel. So it just didn't matter if I looked like I was busy studying, because even if someone was busy chattering at me that I wasn't doing it correctly, the test came back and then their little mind was completely satisfied that they saw the numbers they wanted to see. All of a sudden, it didn't matter what I looked like anymore, because from their perspective, the important part was what I was theoretically achieving, right? And that's what I was doing. This is what's always been hold on, let me take a small second. This is what's always been going on inside of my mind and inside of my heart and inside of my body. I've been living a life where it doesn't matter what it looks like to you. It didn't look like I was studying. I had already done it. I already had the knowledge. For whatever reason, in that moment, I didn't need to do it the way I was being told to do it, because it just wasn't relevant. It's not how I worked. I worked in a different way. And so this concept of being busy, kind of learned how to look like I was poring over the book, but I was also dyslexic and had no idea. I had a suspicion because I studied this stuff and I'd heard it described. But stealth dyslexia had not been discovered at a time frame that would have helped me. And the differences between what people were talking about with dyslexia and my experience are the differences between traditional dyslexia and stealth dyslexia. So I was like, I suspect it, but it doesn't properly line up. And so my autistic mind that needed it to line up and tick all the boxes, I wasn't just going to think, oh, I'm dyslexic because it's kind of similar. I needed to really know. I needed to really hit on all sixes for me to be able to accept that. It wasn't just something I was going to pick up like a mantle for no apparent reason when it seemed like there was evidence that I wasn't. So then people who spent their time in their life studying that would discover, oh, but it can also look like this. It wasn't discovered in enough time to help me during that time frame, but whatever. Honestly, at this point in my life right now, do believe that all the stuff that I went through like that is stuff that I was able to learn from in a certain way. So I had that experience. I didn't have the help, but now I know what it's like to be someone who doesn't have that help. And that's another thing that relates to me and my strengths and my interests in life, because now I can relate to that person and I can empathize with them on multiple levels. I can sympathize because I get it on paper, because I've read and studied about it. And I can empathize because it's just a personal trait that I have. I'm an empath and I feel things strongly and I get things in an empathic way. And on top of it, because I have had the first-hand experience, it actually kind of triggers the memory and the sensation inside of me to some degree, because it's also my sensation. So that's that whole other kind of empathy. It's like it's the same thing, but you can empathize with somebody without having had their experience. Thank God I have had the experience all of my life of being a person who knows that, because I can do it. But I also know that there is a really strong similarity with being able to empathize with somebody. This feels like it's another video I'm about to make, and I'm starting to get tongue-tied. I also know there's a strong similarity, yet some differences in being able to empathize with somebody, because not only are you an empath, which I'll always be, so it'll always affect the reason why I can understand, but because you've actually had the experience. And I think there's got to be some value to me having gone through that. In hindsight, I choose to take it and turn it into something else. I don't know how it's going to help anyone, but it sure didn't help me to go through the harm. So I'm hoping I can take the harm and turn it into something that can help somebody. Let me take a sip and get my thoughts together. This really didn't go where I thought it was going to go. But I'm having all of these nostalgic thoughts. And I'm sitting here, I've got my little cozy throw in my lap, and I've been sitting here with my legs tucked up in the chair. I just put one down, so I'm probably going to stem and shimmy shake in the chair for a little while. But there's just something to me about how somebody's perspective of you. As neurodivergent individuals, we often go through an interesting combination of thinking differently about how people perceive us, because we just think differently about everything. And also having had a lot of experiences where people spend a lot of time sharing with us how they perceive us, even when it's not in a positive way, and even, or sometimes especially, when it is not going to feel good for us to have it presented in that way. And there are a lot of reasons for that I don't want to get into, because I now know that I definitely will get into them for 5 or 10 minutes. But because we go through all of that, we so often are constantly internalizing things. And I see where people are internalizing things. And from my perspective, I've seen where some people seem naturally sensitive to stuff, and some people seem like they picked it up over time because of trauma. Little teeny tiny death by 1,000 cuts traumas, where it's not like somebody just decided to grind in on you over the course of one small time frame like high school or 1 year in high school and give you an issue. But it's stuff that we often experience from the very beginning. Because as soon as we start to learn how to touch and manipulate, assuming that we can do that, whatever it is that we're doing, however it is that we communicate and interact with our environments, somebody very often has something to say about how it's not what they're expecting, it's not normal, it doesn't look the way they want it to look. And so then they have all these different concepts. And again, it's like death by 1,000 cuts, because it's these teeny little suckers that keep getting us, but they build up over time. And before you know it, you have an adult ADHDer or autistic ADHDer who's talking about their shame for not being able to complete a notebook. Your desire to complete your notebook is completely valid. But the reason why I'm talking about this is I've seen some people who are greatly burdened by their incapacity to complete all of their notebooks. It's like, if you can't do it, that's kind of a fail. You failed to complete it. You showed once again that you start something and you never finish it, you know? It goes back into that old dialogue of how people interact with us. It's like, you don't have the, what is it? It's not stamina. That is one of the terms they use, willpower. It's like you don't have the willpower to pick up that one notebook and use that one notebook all the way through. I honestly have never really heard in neurotypical culture people obsessing over not being able to finish their notebooks in the way that I have with people who know that they are neurodivergent. And there is kind of a crossover, but I don't want to address that because it's very real, and a lot of us who are NDs will know. Sometimes you can tell. Even if a person hasn't said so, you can tell. I'm having an interesting experience in life right now because a lot of the people who I watch who are social media content creators, I watch them because there's a compatibility. And then I start thinking over time, that sounds kind of ADHD, what you just said. Oh, that sounds autistic. Oh, this all sounds, eventually I'm like, well, that's just a landslide of neurodivergent stuff. You got to be an ND. And then I start trying to figure out what kind I think they might be. But I don't know. But I do know. It's that thing. I have the sense to know that I don't know 100%. It's not my life. But I do have the sense to know that I know from firsthand experience, and that is one powerful queen. I always say firsthand experience is queen. It's a very, very powerful queen with a whole lot of reach. So it's fascinating for me. The experience I'm having is I'm watching these people because of compatibility. I have these thoughts when they share their stories. And just recently, over the past few months, a whole lot of them have suddenly come out and said, right out of their mouths, quite seriously, without joking, they are disclosing that they know they are neurodivergent, and they will tell you what kind they are. And it's always what I've been thinking. They've been diagnosed, or they've self-diagnosed, or whatever is going on. They suddenly know, and they're disclosing that it's the case. And these are the people who, like, if they're telling you, then if they're, hold on, let me restart. I've got that weird energy going on now. It's just a weird energy time frame in my life. These are the people who, for me, they're disclosing they fully count as your ND. I don't have to worry about that. I don't hear NTs going on about not being able to finish the notebook, but I hear a lot of them going on about that stuff. What I'm saying I don't want to address is that in between where I have the suspicion about people, but I'm not quite sure yet. Because sometimes the suspicion rises. What does it do? The suspicion elevates itself in my mind, and I'm not even sure yet, but I'm just curious. Leaving that section out where I don't know what to do with it yet or where they fit, it's just really fascinating that no one seems to want to talk about this extreme coincidental factor where neurodivergent individuals who have ADHD factors and traits seem to constantly be getting told about how they can't finish anything and how they're not busy enough and whatever they're doing isn't a proper thing to be doing. So even if they're busy at it, they need to be doing something else. Kind of that old-fashioned, well, it's old-fashioned, but it maintains mindset that if what you're doing is reading a book on math strategy, I don't know why these words are choosing themselves, but that's what they're doing. If what you're doing, that old mindset is that if what you are currently doing is reading a book on math strategy, then you are busy and you're a good little girl or boy and you're so smart and you have a large future ahead of you. But if what you're doing is poring over a book of something, let's say you're poring over a book of art, but it's not the masters it's a bunch of manga artists, right? So they're not going to count that because it doesn't fit into their perception. So you're poring over this and you are learning about this art and paying attention to it and you're engrossed in it. But now all of a sudden you're lazy and all you're doing is spending all your time looking at comics and all this different stuff. It's insane. You're just as busy now as you would have been doing that. It's just an issue of whose bent was math and strategy and whose bent was art and perhaps specifically manga. Who knows? I just think that coincidental overlap of people who were told what you're doing isn't good enough, somehow growing up and believing that an inherent trait of ADHD or autism, or both, is just feeling like you're not good enough, needs to be addressed. And so I'm just going to address it. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to say, as crazy as it might sound, that if you spent your whole life being nitpicked and deathed by a million cuts about something, then it's possible that by the time you're an adult and it's been happening all of your life, especially if it's happening from people who are caretakers, contemporaries, peers, whomsoever it might be, but people who mean something to you or who have some kind of hold some. So I talked and talked until my battery died, but what's magical and miraculous is that I remember what I was saying is, if you go through all of this stuff where people are telling you all these things and have all these negativistic viewpoints about your brain and how it works and what you're doing and whether you're busy or not, when you're a child, when you're a teenager, whenever it was, all those years or all of those decades, it's possibly going to have an effect. It might have an effect. In fact, according to the going medicine on the subject, it's going to have an effect on how you look at yourself as an adult and for the rest of your life on the same subject matter. And I'm a person who has a heck of a lot of notebooks. So the reason why I keep talking about that, and I brought that up a lot, is because if I look around, I see notebooks everywhere because I adore them for multiple reasons. Again, a lot of my the business of me being busy, the nature of me and my spirit and how I actually work is a lot of internal stuff. I have a lot of thoughts. I like to study. I like to pay attention. I like to note. I like to remember my thoughts, even though I do have that brain where I can be thinking a million things and forget some of them for a minute, and they probably will come back. Sometimes I really want to be able to remember them when I need them. And so I like to note things. I like books. I like paper. I like a whole lot of things. I'm one of those people where I kind of see beauty in just about everything in life. And so, especially because I have that artistic viewpoint, I just love the style and design of things. I love quality. And so sometimes I've got to have, like sometimes I'm into my stuff because it's just something where I know I'll have it for absolutely ever and it's absolutely cool. And sometimes I'm into it because it just happens to really function for me in a pinch, even if it's not made of the stuff I would want it to be. But I have a million notebooks for a million reasons. And some of them are dedicated to things where I didn't finish it because I don't want to go into it. I'm going to go back into the notebooks. I can tell. Sometimes I didn't finish it because the interest didn't last for that long. Well, guess what? That's one of the markers of an ADHD special interest. One of my life mottos is, I like to know something about everything. That doesn't mean I want to be the world's foremost expert on every subject in the history of all humankind. That would be kind of stressful. It would be enough to occupy the mind, though. I don't think I'd be bored very often, but I'm not sure how I'd ever feel fulfilled if I wanted to know everything all the time. Dang it, if I didn't just realize the reason why my camera is making a weird buzzing noise since I changed the battery is because it's not a camera. It's probably a cicada. I can't believe it. The bugs are getting me again. I talked about this in one of my other videos. One of my short-term, in that video I was talking about some of the traditionally listed differences between autistic special interests and ADHD special interests. And my ADHD one is like a combination of them. I said one of my shorter term interests was, at some point I was being driven crazy by the sound of crickets or something in springtime. Apparently it was mating season, and it seemed like they really enjoyed mating within earshot of me at all hour of the night for just so long I thought I was going to lose it. And one night I did lose it, and my response to losing it was, that's it, I've got to know what this sound is. I don't know if it's a locust, I don't know if it's some type of cricket. I found some other thing, I can't even remember what it was anymore. I thought maybe it might have been that. I spent time online listening to different bugs making mating sounds so I could understand what was driving me crazy. Because in that moment, simply because of function and emergent capacity or status, I could not stop thinking about these bugs. Now, I don't know how many notes I took on them. I think I might have taken some digital notes and probably saved a few links, but I can guarantee you they are very short. They're nil to none in supply and in spread, like the space that they take up, because I was not that interested in those bugs. It doesn't happen to be it is an interesting interest to be interested in bugs. I do think that, but it doesn't happen to be mine. It was a very specific and pointed interest for a very specific time in my life. And this thing singing outside that for a second I, to my horror, thought was my tech doing something weird and funky, has just suddenly reminded me of that too. It's just, all this stuff has been remarked on. That interest in bugs was another thing I started and could never finish. But am I sitting here feeling horrible about it? No, because I'm just so stark raving mad about life like a hatter that I can just sit here and tip my brim and be like, you know what? Maybe you people out there who don't fully understand me, even though it's been my bent in life to understand other people, which makes it weird when they can't do the same for me. That could be a whole nother video. The single empathy problem. But don't mind me, I'm being humorous. I might be getting punchy and tired. I'm definitely 100%. I pretty much started my day that way. It's been that way for a minute, but nonetheless, that could be another video. And all I really want to say right now, after going into all of this, is I guess nostalgia can be a powerful thing. I was sitting here and I was having incredible joy remembering a bunch of great stuff from my childhood, a lot of which was media, by the way. And I was learning stuff from that media too, because even though I didn't realize it at the time, I was starting to kind of understand some more psychology. Man, for all of its cliches, American media can give you some serious information about tropes. And that stuff in and of itself is chock full of at least different versions of psychological findings and theories. It's kind of incredible, and I was even learning about that then when I was watching all these things. And I guess, I don't know, maybe I'll make a more pointed video on the concept of what is being busy and what isn't. But I was in the kitchen and my mind was just going off while I was thinking about this and the coffee and all the different stuff I'm doing. And I was really enjoying being in a kitchen by myself, because I've had decades of having weird experiences where when I least expect it, even if I'm just in the kitchen gathering some coffee and getting together a meal, somebody might have something to do about how busy I look while I'm doing it and whether or not I'm doing different things correctly. And that, I think, is when it started to cross my mind, because it is just so relaxing not to have that head peering over your shoulder telling you about that. And so then I started to think about the effect of it on us. And I worry sometimes that we as a nation, so to speak, but the nation of neurodivergence, are not okay. And I know that a lot of us aren't. I'm not unaware. Again, that's my thing. But I'm thinking as a whole, sometimes we're not okay in a specific way that, how do I say this? I'm going to preface by saying, again, whatever it is your experience it is, that's valid. And what you're thinking about, what's going on in your mind and where it came from, is valid. I want to also add, because I know some people are going to need to hear this and you're going to relate and you're already thinking this way or you're open to it and you need to hear it. A lot of the stuff that's considered to be naturally us just being nervous about things, just being concerned about things, and a lot of our own dialogue about stuff like how we need to be more productive and we're not being productive and all this. There are different things. Sometimes you end up, there's the thing where you end up just kind of frozen and it doesn't feel good. But sometimes we're saying we're not being productive because what we're doing is spending too much time doing something we love. And the reason why we think we're not being productive while we're feeding our spirit and we're actively, to paraphrase another term people love and everybody understands, while we are actively becoming the change that we want to see in the world, people are telling us that we're not doing anything at all. That affects us. And it's not necessarily that we're not capable of completing a notebook, and that's a character flaw. Sometimes we're just so piqued by all the other things in life that there are to be tasting and exploring that that's a really good metaphor too, tasting it. We're out there trying to taste all of these things. For some of us, especially that ADHD brain, life is this infinite menu of incredible dishes, of experiences, of smells and tastes and senses, of manga and oil paints and what do they call them? Tempera and watercolor, and there are watercolor pencils, and there are pastels, and there are all these different things, acrylics and stuff where you can use your hands and stuff where you're throwing stuff across the wall. And I saw a video where somebody mounted buckets of paint and drew the canvas underneath them in order to create along a rip. Well, now I've run out of SD card space and I had to clear some. But what I'm trying to say is I was watching this person do this with these paints and the buckets and the rhythm, and the video had music in it. I don't know if there was music playing when it was being done. That would have been so cool to have it sort of affected by the vibrations and how it's inspired and all that stuff. But I remember looking at this and it was just fulfilling me. And it's another thing where it's like, oh, what are you doing? I'm on social media. Oh, really? Just watching videos then? Yeah, I was just watching videos that were feeding my soul and triggering another interest. And if I had had a setup to start pouring paints everywhere out of buckets, I probably would have been pouring paints everywhere out of buckets. And guess what? It would have been another thing I started and didn't complete according to somebody's definition, because that's not my main interest in life. But man, would it have been an amazing, magnificent thing for me to taste and experience to do. And watching the video was enlivening, and it brought me more refreshing for my love for arts and everything magnificent in the world. And it's all a tasting menu. Life is a tasting menu. Sometimes people go to a restaurant and they know exactly what they want, and that's perfect. They get what they want. They get that one dish. They might get it every single time, and they're happy with that. Sometimes a person goes in, they try something new. They get that one dish. That's the one they eat that night. It doesn't matter if you change it up maybe once because you're not into it. You basically are sticking with the dish. That's the menu. Everyone perceives that as knowing what you want and really being able to go in and place an order and be decisive about it. But what if you're a person who doesn't have any idea what is on that menu and you want to taste everything? One person might look at you, and because they have no idea how you work or what you're there for, they might say, she can't make a decision. What's wrong with her? What a waste. Oh my gosh, so much food that's never going to get eaten. She didn't even bring enough people. What's wrong with her? That's just so weird. Why would anybody order that much stuff? Where's your restraint? Where's your willpower? And somebody else who has a different perspective on life might look at that person and be like, okay, you guys in the kitchen, we really need to be on tonight. It looks like we might have a food reviewer here whose job and mission in life it is to taste everything. And they're ordering a little something off of every part of the menu. And so from their perspective, they're like, we want to get this right, because from my perspective, I'm looking at what this person is doing and I'm not thinking that they're indecisive and they don't know what to do and they're making a waste. I'm thinking that it is their mission in life right now to taste everything, to learn something about all of it, and then at the very least to be able to describe to all of the waiting participants, the readers or the watchers of whatever form of media they're going to use to transmit this information. They're going to express to them what they just had on that menu. And now, because it's been their job to taste everything, the tasting menu of life, the pouring of the acrylic paints, the green notebook, the purple notebook, all of the many different notebooks of all the many different sizes with all the many different notes and all the different interests, whether they be about bugs that lasted for a few minutes of my life or something like psychology and spirituality that have lasted since jump. Psychology, sexuality, and spirituality, they have been in there since the very beginning. And for me, psychology and spirituality are basically the same thing. It's all just trying to figure out how we work, what we're doing it all for, what the repercussions are and all that stuff. All of these things, they're things to taste. And I've had a magnificent autistic and ADHD tasting menu of life because I have there's this term I'm referencing. I'm doing it intentionally in a slightly lovingly mocking way, where somebody believed, I've heard this term and I can't find it since, but something about the magnificent white male brain theory of autism for people who are autistic and known to be geniuses. I have the magnificent autistic and ADHD brain that allows me to actually find some way to taste everything on the menu of life and get an experience for it. So now not only do I know what everything tastes like, I know a little something about everything, but now if somebody has a question, and this has been a great deal of the bent of my life is to do stuff like this. If somebody has a question or they're curious or they're about to try something, they don't know, they want to talk about it, they're open to the conversation, and they're talking with me, I can about guarantee you I have something to share. And if I don't have something to share, I have something to learn because my magnificent brain allows me to taste everything. Now I know what everything I've already tasted tastes like. I've tasted more because I was interested in more menus for more restaurants and all this stuff. I'm very proud of myself and I'm happy with who I am and all the things I couldn't complete and all the stuff that I was doing that was random, like the art and all of this. Oh, you're not busy enough. You're not focusing on something that's really going to, what's the word? I can't think of the word, but it basically means this isn't an efficient use of your time. What are you going to do with this information? You can spend all of your life studying the arts, but let's say you, like me, didn't have the opportunity to study them abroad or someplace cutesy or in a particular school and dedicate your whole educational career to that. So what good is it going to do you if you can't come out of it with a degree in it? Or what good is it going to do you if you're studying that instead of something else? There are a whole generation of people out there right now. Maybe some of you are listening to this video. I don't know. We are the neurodivergent crowd. Some of us have that interest and that capacity. You're out there programming and engineering things. You might be working on video games. What I'm thinking of specifically is listening to people who've been saying for decades, they kept telling me I was wasting my time. As a child, I was playing those video games. You're wasting your time. You're not going to learn anything from it. You're not going to be able to turn that into a life. This is not productive. And guess what they did? They took that time, that passion, and all those tastes that they made of all the stuff that was already out there, and they turned it into a bunch of brand new recipes. They've had a hand in making new video games. These people, a lot of them are game programmers today. You know why? Because they wasted their time doing something that wasn't busy enough and wasn't busy culture enough and didn't make sense and was going to rot their brain cells. All of that made them so well versed and gave them such a fluid understanding of how things worked and how they wanted them to work and what they wanted to see, and gave them visions like the Star Wars thing. I know this is touchy for some people, but I remember when there was Star Wars, the original came out, it became the trilogy, and then all this time later, there's a whole thing where people are like, why did George Lucas change or allow the change, blah, blah, blah. It was remastered, right? It's changed. I like the original one. I don't need this. But you know what I heard? I heard, and I don't remember where, but I'm sure somebody else, again, probably knows somewhere, I could swear I remember George Lucas himself saying, this is always the remastered one that other people were upset about because it was a change. You can be upset about it, fine. But what he said, to my memory, was that that was what he had always imagined. But when they started, which was decades prior, no one had, the opportunity wasn't there. The tech hadn't been invented yet. So then all this time went by and he's in a position, which would be a blessing for a lot of us with a lot of things we're interested in, to be able to tweak what was already there so that it now better embodies his original vision. We don't know what was inside of his mind, but we can watch those remastered movies and get an idea. I think that's a pretty amazing kind of magic. Movie magic, they call it. I just think it's generally an incredibly fascinating form of magic and manifestation to take something from inside of somebody's mind, their dream, their imagination, and make it so that the rest of the world can see it. And again, as an artist, it's one of those things that to some degree, I still hope to do, and I spent a huge amount of my life wanting to do. And there's something amazing to me just in even taking that moment to listen to this person speak about how they got to do it, because it fed me another thing off of another infinite tasting menu. And maybe it wasn't a series of recipes and dishes that I had at my access and in my own personal kitchen, but it gave me an understanding of something else that was out there that's possible to be tasted. And you know what? I like having an infinitely expanded, exotically capable palate that can tolerate just about anything, even if I have my own likes and dislikes, because I'm willing to go out there and taste everything on the menu. And I guess now I've said just about absolutely everything I've wanted to say on that subject. I'm realizing to my most hideous chagrininess that I don't have, that's a term I made up. It's like saying to my chagrin, but I'm saying it's a hideous chagrin. I'm saying it's a really bad situation right here. I'm realizing to my most hideous chagrininess that I'm at the point where it's time to give my outro. I don't know where it is, so I'm going back into YouTube so I can find my video and my pinned comment, because that's what I'm doing every single time. If you've got anything to say, I always want to see it in the comments. I want us to start conversations. One of the reasons why I'm doing all of this, and one of the reasons why I ever started, was to trigger the thought and the conversation and help people pull stuff together that a lot of you are already thinking or feeling or wanted to see or hear, just so we can talk about it amongst ourselves. Because a lot of the stuff that I went through and barely survived, and a lot of the stuff that other people went through and didn't, is because there was no one there to talk about it. And I just found my passion again. I'm not sure, I thought I still had that. There's a purpose to everything I've been doing. Whew. So what I'm trying to say is, have any thoughts or questions, share them in the comments. Notice any gaps in the autistic, ADHD, or ADHD community conversation? Want a spiritually, mystically inclusive indie voice on a subject? I'm a Christian mystic. Affects everything I do and experience in life. Just looking for an extra opinion or viewpoint? Share your suggestions in the comments. If I can address them, I might make them into a video. Remember to like, share, subscribe, ring the notification bell for all of my newest updates, and be blessed. I just remembered my taste for the subject of content making. Thank God. More stuff on the tasting menu of life. That was a beautiful moment. I'm glad I got to film it and share it. I hope somebody sees it, and I hope it does you good, because it's doing me good. We all need our hearts done some good. And that's part of why I'm doing this too. That's about it. Bye now.